The following may contain language that is not appropriate for all audiences. You know, small children, people that are easily offended, whatnot. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us once again here on the Low Fact Podcast, or Philosophy by Dummies, or whatever you want to call it. So, what was the question that I had for today?
Does being exposed to a message make you believe it, accept it, or just act like you do?
Yeah, because that's something that we're always kind of exposed to, right? If you hear something over and over again, you're gonna believe it. I don't know if that's true. Is it true? Do you think it's true?
I think it's true sometimes because, well, I don't know the way I can put it. Some advertising works pretty well on me. Like when, like a message, when it comes to like Kleenex and stuff like that, even though I'm supposed to call it tissues. I've always been calling it Kleenex. Maybe they were trying to tell me that.
I don't think that's kind of
the same. I try to make the comparison to how advertising is so effective on us, and at a certain point we start memorizing like logos and like slogans for certain products.
Well, I think that's just because it's kind of catchy and it's more like brand recognition, name recognition type deal.
It's like repeated to me, so that's why.
The reason I think about this was because there's a conservative radio host who was on Bill Maher's show, and he was kind of it was Dennis Prager. So basically, Dennis Prager was on Bill Maher's show with a bunch of other people, and Dennis Prager said something like, pretty soon, the left is. He was totally going off on the left and leftists, and he said, they're going to sit there and say, men can menstruate, and I don't know if it's because if it's the way he said menstruate, because he said something like menstruate or menstruate or something like that, but the entire audience laughed at him. Like, oh my God, how can you, right?
You said that wrong.
Well, the entire audience laughed at him, and now we're inundated with stuff about how transgender men are men and they can menstruate. Like they're thinking about there's a push to make like menstrual pads either free or non-tax or whatever, but this whole idea about men can menstruate, everybody's on board with it, or they act like they are on the left. And I don't even want to call it the left, but that got me to thinking. I was like, well, do you believe the message, or are you just kind of acting like you do? And the same can be said with the whole idea that you get what you deserve. You get stuff through your efforts. That's the message. Do we all believe it?
I've questioned it of lately.
I mean, I don't believe it, but there are people that do. And there are people that act like they do. I'm just like, well, do you believe it or are you acting like it?
So the transgender one is a very black and white example. Because with the transgender, I'm like, of course, like a man can't menstruate. I mean, and it wouldn't matter how many times somebody gave me that message, I just wouldn't accept it. But in the case of the work hard and you'll do well, that was drummed into me from fucking childhood, and I kind of believe that message.
So you're saying that, yeah, if you hear something enough times, you'll actually believe it? That's what you're saying?
I think it's...
Because I don't think putting categories on stuff is actually... Because a lot of things that we try to act like is not... That it isn't a binary choice, like it's, A or B. It is. A lot of things are actually very binary.
But
just like my question.
I think no.
You don't think that if you hear something enough times that you'll believe it?
No. If it aligns for what you want to believe, yeah, you're gonna believe it easily. But if you don't like something or you don't agree with something, regardless of how many times I say it to you, you're still not gonna agree with it.
But
I think it's no, because you'll agree with it. If you hear it enough and you like the idea, you'll be okay with believing it. If you don't like or you don't agree with the idea, regardless of how many times you're told, you're still going to be resistance toward it.
But that wasn't what I originally asked, was it?
It's not?
What did I originally ask?
Does being exposed to a message make you believe it? Accept it or just act like you do? That's not, isn't he answering your question?
No, he's answering your question.
What was,
And your statement went off on is actually kind of a variation of my question.
was it?
Yeah.
I feel like I answered your question.
No, you answered the question that you wanted to answer, posed as my question.
How?
Then I got Matt's
How is
question.
it different?
My question is, if you hear something enough times, do you actually believe it or do you act like you do?
Well, doesn't it depend on the something? It depends on the message.
And that's my point. I don't think it does.
Sure it does. Like if it's something that either doesn't affect you, right? So you well, in that scenario, if it's something that doesn't affect you, then you're just going to be like, whatever. Okay, yeah, fine. Right? Go away. Right? But if it affects you,
So your answer to my question is yes.
If you hear a message enough, you're gonna believe it.
No. Your answer to my question is yes.
except no, but
I asked the question, does it make you do either A or B? And you said yes.
it depends. It depends on the context. It depends on the question.
No.
Yeah.
My question is the question.
No, but there's like gray areas though. Like if it's the trans thing, that's clear.
Again, that's just an example, and I'm regretting the fact that I decided to throw that in to try and shed more light, because what I said is happening is just happened.
I don't understand.
What I said happens when we're not recording. I told you this is what happens, and it's exactly what happened.
Maybe your questions suck.
That's a possibility. Hell, it might
Or
be.
they might be too difficult. Or too...
That might be a possibility
There might
too.
be too much leeway in your question.
Maybe, but it's
It's like open to interpretation.
no. My question is, does
No, but your
X
question is...
does X make A happen or B happen? And your answer was yes.
Well, it can be any of those things. Some questions you're going to believe. Some questions you're just going to accept and be like, I don't give a shit about it because it doesn't affect me.
There's no question. You're
And
talking
the-
about message. You're substituting words here.
Oh.
I said, if you hear a message enough times, do you believe it? Believe it, accept it, or act like you do? And you said, uh-huh.
No.
What's the difference between acting like it and actually believing it? If you act like it, even if you don't.
What does that even really matter?
Well, because why would you act on it if you don't believe in it?
No, not act on it. So you changed it too. I just said, do you accept it
Or act like you accept it.
or act like it?
What's the difference?
What's the difference?
Yeah, you're accepting it either way.
Are you?
Yeah. You may not like it, but you accept it.
Really?
You accept it or you act like you accept it.
It's different.
You still accept it either way.
Believe. It's believe it, accept it, or act like you do.
So
Act like you accept it.
And you said, oh yeah, you accept it or you act like you accept it, so that's the same.
you acting like you accept it as opposed to.
But what part
Accept-
about believing it? You
No,
wash
I'm
right
confused.
over.
I'm like, so accepting it and acting like you accept it. What do you mean by that? Like, I'm really confused by that. If I'm acting like I accept it,
Then you're not believing it.
but I still accept it.
No. Well, accepting is different from belief.
But you're still accepting. It's the end result that I'm more concerned about than what you believe in.
But that wasn't the
Now-
question.
I'm so confused.
Now you answered
I'm so
your question.
confused by the question. I'm confused by the question.
All right, that's enough.
That's the problem. Thank you for listening to the Low Fact Podcast. Find us on Stitcher and iTunes. Just search Low Fact Podcast. Find us on Twitter and Instagram at Low Fact Podcast. Send us an email at lowfactpodcast@gmail.com. Find us on YouTube. Search Low Fact. All the links can be found in our About. Also, look for my music on IG and Twitter at AFantasyBeat.